Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Interpersonal Toastmasters. We have a very special event today. Our very own club member, our club secretary, Jim Denson, is going to be giving us a session on storytelling. Now, why is that important? Because stories are magic. They can create other worlds, emotions, ideas, and make every day seem incredible. Stories certainly enchant people from all age groups, from children to adults. Come join the magical event tonight, where we're going to be having the best source for your stories, Jim Denson. Is going to share why you are the best person to tell your story and how you can develop yours. Jim joined Toastmasters in 2013, so that gives him 10 years, a full decade of membership in Toastmasters. Throughout this time, he has worked on his ability to tell stories, and he'd like to have this opportunity to give you, the audience, some insights into the process he uses in storytelling. He is masterful. Jim, please help me welcome Jim Denson, storytelling.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I am humbled. Tonight, my talk called Find Your Story. It's about you, about the story that is within you, why you're the best person to tell your story. And as Susan said in her introduction, I'll be giving you some insights into how you can develop the stories that are within you. I begin first with a question. Have you ever been embarrassed for yourself or for someone you love? Have you ever been embarrassed for yourself or someone you love? I have to say, and I'm embarrassed to say now, since I'm an adult, I'm thinking back to my childhood, and I must say, yes, I was embarrassed about certain things in my childhood involving someone who I adore greatly to this day. When my sister and brother and I were born, we were born in that order, my sister first, then my brother, then me. When we were born, my mom, whose name is Wilma, my mom was a teenager during each of our births. It was also during her teenage years that she had the misfortune of being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. It's a serious mental illness that usually comes about during a person's teenage years. She was not able to care for us as we normally expect our parents to do because of that illness. So her mother, my grandmother, whose name is Carthenia, stepped into the breach. I will step in, I will care for you and the children, because I cannot bear the thought of having these children go into foster care. So my grandmother was the first hero or heroine that I remember for doing that incredible sacrifice. But in order for her to do it, she had to quit a job that she had been doing for many years. And quitting that job meant that she would have to go on public assistance. In those days, it was known as welfare. And the word welfare has a stigma attached to it. And that stigma was, we would be known by some people as being poor. I was embarrassed about that as a kid. Another thing I was embarrassed about is, well, the way I was born. I was born 3 months premature, and a certain amount of oxygen didn't get to my brain. And because of that, when I was born, I was diagnosed with a condition called cerebral palsy. It's a neurological condition that affects certain parts of the brain, and how severe it is depends on how much oxygen is deprived at birth in the brain. Now, when I was first born, I had to be in an incubator for weeks just to survive. I was less than 2 pounds. And back in the early 60s, a person coming into the world under those circumstances was not guaranteed of survival. However, because of my grandmother's dogged persistence in making sure I got all the surgeries I needed, by age 4, I was able to walk. But I still had some things I had to deal with. I had weak legs, so I had to wear braces. I fell a lot, so I had to wear a helmet. Now, the other thing I was embarrassed about, Mom was living with us during that time, and when I would fall, my mom was like a cheerleader. She wouldn't laugh at my falling. She would just say, "Get up, boing, boing, get up. Don't just lay there, get up." The embarrassing thing about that, what parent would have the audacity to call their kid boing, boing? It was the funniest thing, the way she said it, but I felt kind of weird about that. I guess the biggest thing I felt weird about during my childhood is when we would be together, whether it's at dinner or as a family, what have you, we would be talking to our mom, and Mom would be looking at us, but looking at her, it would seem as though she's having another conversation entirely with someone who we couldn't see and someone who we couldn't hear. That was part of her mental illness. We got used to it because aside from all the things that embarrassed me as a child, she had one superpower. She had a couple of them, actually. The main superpower she has and still has to this day, the most beautiful smile. When you meet her, you are greeted with her electric, just generously beautiful smile and a kind word. It is so disarming. You can't stay mad at her. So that was the superpower that she had. Now, one of the other things about my mom is that as pleasant as she was as a person, it wasn't hard to love her, but it was hard to get to know her. And because she was often in her own world, and she was in her own world as her way of dealing with her mental illness. It was her survival mechanism to a certain extent, but it closed her off from us getting to know her. And I wondered through those early years, would I ever get to know her in any real way? Well, my first opportunity would come in March of 2011. By this time, she had been in a nursing facility for several years, and she still remains there to this day. But back in March of 2011, I get a phone call from my Aunt Mary, my grandmother's sister. Aunt Mary called me by my middle name, Maurice. "Hey, Maurice, I'm calling you from the hospital. The doctors here need your permission to allow them to do life-saving procedures for your mom. Your mom has sepsis. And what sepsis is a condition generally in which the body becomes toxic. And for her, it was dangerously toxic, and she needed emergency care. And I needed to make a decision, but it was no decision. Of course, I said yes, absolutely. I got to the hospital later that night to see her for the first time since getting the call. And it was around dinner time. And mom loves to eat. One of the reasons that I love to cook as much as I do is that I like cooking for her and making her things and bringing things over to her. She would love it. I didn't get to do that time, but I was there at dinner time. And I noticed something very striking. Her hands were shaking so much, she couldn't bring the fork to her mouth. She couldn't. So I gently took the fork and I guided it into her mouth as she bit down on it. And as our eyes met, a jolt, almost electrical, went through me. I've never had the feeling before or since, but I think it was a feeling of connection with her that I had never before felt. It reminds me of when I hear mothers talk about bonding with their babies and why feeding time is so important. That's what it seemed like to me. It was a bonding moment. And in that moment, I told my mom, who I had up to that time, I'd been visiting her casually, maybe twice a month or so, knowing that she was getting good care. But I said, Mom, I promise you, I am going to see you every week from now on, and sometimes more if I can, because I love you and I want you to know that I'm going to be there for you any way I can. And I can say, over these last 12 years, I have largely been able to keep that promise. And I'm so glad that within that time, she has trusted me enough to tell me about some things about her childhood. She used to play piano as a child. I never would have known that. She was a Girl Scout. She had a mentor by the name of Venus Walton, who meant a lot to her. She had some fun during her childhood. It wasn't all strife and illness. She had happy times. And she told me all about some of the family weddings that she had attended at home. What a pleasure to hear all of that history that I couldn't hear anywhere else. Now, why and what does the story I just told have to do with the presentation tonight? How does it relate to you? Well, it relates to you, I believe, because according to two experts I want to mention, Darren LaCroix and Mark Brown, two world champions of public speaking. They do coaching and they're authors, and they do a lot about storytelling. And one of the most powerful things they say, and it's true, we as people are governed by emotion. And what we try to do when we tell stories is we try to connect with people on an emotional level, not to manipulate people, no, but it's just to have people connect to us on a human level. How do you connect? I said by emotions. And there are certain emotions that most of us can identify with. Things like joy, and love and hope, maybe anger, maybe sadness, regret, gratitude. In one way or another, those are emotions that practically all of us as people have felt at one time or another in our lives. And it's those common threads by which stories can help us to connect with each other. Because we are a social being, we need connection. And when we speak, we're performing an act of generosity. So when we're speaking to people, the people we're speaking to, we are trying as speakers to fill a need for them. And the need for them is, how is the talk that I'm hearing, how is it going to help me? How is it going to relate to my life? Now, why are we as storytellers, and why do I believe that you are the best person to tell your stories? Well, another thing that Mark Brown and Darren LaCroix say is that as far as stories go, the best source of stories is your own life. And who knows more about your life than you do? Who has experienced more in your life than you have? That's where the most impactful and powerful stories come from your life. It's a matter of just going deeply and searching deeply into that life. Who are people who've inspired you? What have you learned from them? What have they learned from you? Who do you cherish in your life? Whom do you miss? The answers to those questions are somewhere within your life. And if you search for it, it's possible for you to find it. Now, I'm going to continue in speaking about my mom, because there is another part of the story that I want to convey tonight in hopes that it is in some way helpful to you. You heard about my mom's situation in 2011, March. Fast forward to 2022, around Thanksgiving time. Earlier that month in November of 2022, my mom had had surgery. She needed a pacemaker placed up near her shoulder. She was having an irregular heartbeat. They did a surgery. She tolerated it very well. But she was sending some strange vibes to people. One of them was she started to refuse to eat for some reason. And remember, she loves to eat. For weeks, she refused. She was giving off indications, hey, I don't want to live anymore. I'm tired of this. She even used those words, I'm tired of this. It was a shock to me. What's wrong, Mom? Why aren't you eating? And not only was she not eating, she wasn't drinking anything either. And it was having a major impact on her body. She was losing weight and getting weaker by the day. I didn't know what to do. I was visiting her during this time, maybe 3 times a week on average. And all the visiting, all the love, all the companionship, it just didn't seem to make any difference. She was still not eating. And on Thanksgiving, I made some turkey to bring to her. She promised she would eat it. When the time came, sorry, Maurice, I can't eat it. So she refused. I was at a loss. The next day at work, I tell a trusted colleague and friend about the situation. He offers to do a Google search because my sister had not visited my mom in ages. My brother neither, but my brother lives relatively close to me, and we talk. So, but I hadn't heard from my sister in ages. We had lost touch there for a while, for many years. And I had lost her address. I didn't even know where she lived. My colleague did a Google search, came up with one address. And I wasn't sure whether that was the right address, but I was desperate. I wanted to know, my sister to know about mom's condition. My brother thought, well, since she doesn't, she hasn't been visiting, maybe I wouldn't be so quick to try to tell her about this. But there's something in me that said, no, I have to let my sister know about what's going on. So I took a chance. I wrote a very short note. Hi, Adrian, I hope you're well. Mom's not doing very well. She may not have very much longer to live. Here's my phone number if you want to talk to me. I mailed it off December 15th of 22, not knowing what to expect and half expecting nothing at all. Sunday, December 18th, 2022, a beautiful Sunday afternoon. It's about 2 o'clock. I'm getting up, getting ready to go to my car to go visit my mom. The phone rings. It's my sister, Adrian. The first time I had talked to her in more than 5 years. I updated her on mom's condition. She said, I am going to visit her as soon as I can. But let me tell you something before we go. I want to thank you so much for finding me. Thank you so much for finding me. During the 7 years we'd been out of contact, I didn't know what to think. Was she angry with me? What was going on? I didn't know. It just turned out that she was going through her own things. Well, my sister did visit my mom the very next day and had been there to see her a couple of times since then. For my mom, it was a rallying point because 2 days after Christmas, December 27, she started eating again. And my brother had visited her a few times too during this time between Christmas and New Year's. Seeing her children, each of the children who she bore into the world, seeing them, I think, seeing us, I think, made her want to live again, I believe. And I also believe, as a non-psychiatric expert, I think too, one of those conversations, private conversations that she'd been having with whoever that we couldn't see and couldn't hear, and that looked so strange in childhood, maybe one of those conversations might have influenced her too, to get back into life. And since then, she is firmly back into life. And although she may not know it, she can really bask in the knowledge that she performed the act of a hero by, in her own way, bringing me, my brother, and sister back together again. The process continues. We're still working on it. But my mom was the catalyst. And I consider her heroic for her doing that. How do you develop your own stories? How do you find your own stories? Well, here, what I do when I get ready for a presentation, like for example, when I was preparing this presentation tonight, the first thing I did, I start writing, just write everything that comes to mind on paper. Don't try to edit anything at this point, just write everything down, just get it all out. And then once you have it on paper, once you go through everything, you will feel there are going to be some ideas that you write out that are going to feel better than others, that are going to resonate with you more than others. Those are probably going to be the best ideas that would fit into whatever speech you're going to give. And once you make decisions on what it is you're going to talk about, what ideas are going to go into your talk, then it's time to edit those ideas. And there's another world champion of public speaking by the name of Mike Carr, who's an expert in terms of editing. Now, the three experts whose names I've mentioned, Mike Carr, Darren LaCroix, Mark Brown, you can find a lot of material for each of them on YouTube. They're easily available there. But they expertly give more and deeper information that you may want to look for at some point after my presentation tonight. So after you edit your speech, you then rehearse it. And by rehearsing it, I mean you want to rehearse it to the point where it sounds like you're just having a conversation. You want to internalize your ideas to the point so thoroughly and so much that your ideas become what I call become a part of you. Another word for it is your ideas become internalized, meaning that while you're getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth, you could be having a conversation about what you're going to speak about. While you're eating breakfast, same thing. Certain ideas will come to mind. You can have a conversation about them while you're doing that. You can have conversations about what you're going to talk about while you're living your life, so that when the moment arrives, when that speech day or speech night becomes the hour that you are featured to speak, you will do it. And it will sound so conversational, and you'll be so natural that it will be easy and much easier for the audience to connect with what it is you're telling them, because you're conversing with them on a level that they can relate to. You can do that. You have that power within you. Now, one of the final things I want to say about stories too is part of why we tell stories and part of why we speak is because we want to influence people in a certain way. We want people to know something about us maybe that they didn't know before. We want them to get value from what we're saying. So we want them to know something about us. We want them to feel something. Maybe you didn't have a parent who had mental illness like my mom does, but I can almost guarantee you that you've had the same kind of love toward your mom or dad or parent that I have toward mine. We can connect on that level. So in telling stories, we want you to feel something as well as to know something about us. And thirdly, we give stories and tell stories because we want people to do something. And what I want you to do tonight, by hearing the stories that I have told, I want you to consider, hey, what Jim was saying reminds me of something from my life that I could talk about. We tell stories because we want to possibly help somebody who's going through something difficult in their lives. Maybe something that they hear might help in some way to have an audience member think, wow, I never thought of it that way. Now you may have some objections, all right? What I'm asking you to do, it can be demanding. Developing a story and so forth, it's not a short process. You have to go deep in order to really get the most out of it. And you might say, well, look, I'm not really used to speaking, and I really don't want to get into difficult or painful topics. I understand that completely. And I'm not saying that you should talk about things that are too painful for you. But I want you to know this. My approach to difficult emotions and difficult topics, like when my mom was signaling that she didn't want to live anymore, what I would suggest, or what I did, is I tried to think about, as painful as that was for me, what can I learn from it that can help someone else in what they're dealing with? You see, because one of the other reasons that we speak is that we don't know the kind of impact that we're having. The audience might not tell us right away, but I think to some degree we have to have faith that there's somebody out there who is hearing what we're saying and feeling what we are telling them and what we're relating to them. And we're doing it at a very important time in their lives when they may need to hear it most. And again, we may never know. We just have to have that faith. So in closing, I encourage you, there is a story within you waiting to be heard, waiting for you to tell it. You are the person to do it. You have the wherewithal, and you have people whom you can go to for more guidance. But for right now, you have my brotherly support and brotherly wish to begin that storytelling journey. And I wish you the best in all those efforts, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Jim. Can we have please, a nice round of applause for Jim for his session on storytelling and his
Thank you.
heartfelt message. I would like
Thank you.
to ask a question or two and then open it up to some others in the audience, Jim, if that's okay with you,
Fine,
for
certainly.
some of the ideas. We heard your story, very heartfelt, by the way. We can appreciate the challenges that may have been brought to you in your life, and yet you sit here as a successful storyteller, that you can use that as your background to who you are, and yet you're not sitting there with a feeling of woe is me, feel sorry for me. By any means, you have this confidence that you have. I love the fact, and I'm commenting before I ask my question, I love the fact that you are able to do that for our benefit, because you never know when somebody in the room is there. The challenge that we have in storytelling is there's so much to pick from. How do you go about selecting which topic to give at certain times when you're giving a story?
I think about what is resonating with me at a certain time. Certain professional speakers will say, as well, especially people who give keynotes, like in concert halls or convention halls, they'll say, well, take time to go out and maybe meet the audience or canvas who you're going to be speaking to. Sometimes that's not always possible, especially in a virtual situation. So what I want to do is make sure that whatever it is I talk about, that I am acquainted with it enough so that I think that it can relate to other people, that there is something in what I say that other people can hold on to, even if our experiences are different, even if our respective cultures where we come from are different. There has to be something there. So I'm looking at something that has maybe a universal value to it, a universal theme. That's the first thing I do when I'm trying to choose a story. But what's most important is I have to be moved by it, and I have to be invested in it. In preparing for this talk tonight, there were other stories that I was trying out as late as Monday, but they just didn't seem to work. And I liked the stories. I could probably tell them at another point, but they just didn't seem to work for this presentation tonight. It's a process, and it's an involved process, but we all have the ability to undertake that because we're
Super.
all intelligent, emotional human beings.
Thank you, Jim, for that thoughtful answer. I'm going to open up to our members and guests. Do you have any questions for Jim about his story or his storytelling techniques? Any questions? Yeah, Richa?
Hi, good morning.
Good
Though
morning.
I joined a bit late, but believe me, the speech was not only informative, but it was very much insightful also. My question is when we should not use storytelling? When we should not use storytelling?
When should we not use storytelling? I think, well, my answer may disappoint you to some degree because Toastmasters has been such an adventure for me over these years. And I've learned that storytelling can be done in whatever kind of speaking situation you have. Now, one of the ideas that I was going to go with for tonight's presentation, I told you a little bit about my grandmother if you had the opportunity to hear it. She was a very morally strong individual, and she had a rule. She said, not only can you not lie in my home, which is a great rule, of course, who wants liars around?
Yes.
But we were not even allowed to say the word lie. So when I or my brother as children were saying something that she thought was a lie, she said, oh, there you go, telling them stories again. Stop telling them stories. Now, just imagine what it's like for somebody to have lying equated with storytelling and storytelling equated with lying. That was hard for me because people were telling me, well, look how far you've come given your disability. You have a story to tell.
Yes.
And you really should tell that story. Now, my grandmother really didn't mean any harm by saying, by equating stories with lies. She probably didn't know she was doing that. But I don't think there are inappropriate
Yes.
times to tell the stories. The story that you tell may or may not be appropriate for a given situation. But I think if the effort is to have your audience take something valuable away from it, stories are probably the most immediate way to do it, because you want to connect with the speaker. They really want, well, just think of yourself. I mean, if you're speaking about something and it doesn't matter what you're talking about, yeah, they want your information that you're giving, but in a way, they also want you. They want a piece of you. They want to bring, they want to see how much of yourself you bring to what you're saying. And that's what stories do. They bring you into what you're talking about. That's why I think stories are so important.
Absolutely. You are absolutely right. Actually, as a soft skills trainer, whenever I share a story with my students, sometimes I feel I get carried away. I get lost in my own world and it becomes difficult for me to come back. So, otherwise, it is always great. It helps me to connect better. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for that response,
Thank you.
Jim. Thank you for that question, Richa.
Sure.
Do any of our other guests have a question for Jim about his storytelling techniques? So as I've heard from both Darren LaCroix, Mark Brown, and Mike Carr,
Mhm.
the reason we speak to one another is not just to hear ourselves talk, but we have a message to get across. Teachers are taught to say the message, repeat the message, and repeat it again so that it registers in the open ears of the audience. But when you master the storytelling techniques that Jim demonstrated here tonight, it is more memorable than the message he says, tell a story, you can do it. But by him putting himself on the line, so to speak, telling us about himself and showing us how to share the emotions of the setting, the details, the date, the names. Doesn't it transport us to that time and place? And then we have our imaginations filling up with all of the things that we're hearing, and we're imagining ourselves right there in that room with Jim as he's explaining the details. And that is far more effective than Jim saying, very matter-of-factly, this is my story, this is what I did, this is how it turned out. Wah, wah, who cares? But when you emote the feelings that you have, the way you've overcome the adversities and the challenge with mom's health, and then the success. We could hear the joy. We could see the smile on your face. Didn't everyone feel connected in some way to that story? Each time we heard it, different messages of it, far better than if it's just reading a story. Now in Toastmasters, we have one skill that we ask of our members to do, and we call that vocal variety. And the reason for that is, rather than being a monotone sound such as everything's on one note, if I were talking to you like a robot, it would not be so interesting. But if I said to you that you need to use the voice that you have to get the message across with such impact and emotions, isn't that more memorable? And in Toastmasters, if you've been a member or visited a club, or even if you're brand new and have never been to one, you listen, you learn, and then you do. And in a way, that's what Jim was telling us. You're writing it down, you're selecting the stories, you're editing, you're rehearsing, And then he's challenging us to go off and tell the story, know something, give that value, feel something, and then do something. Each part of that gave us some valuable lesson to take forth from this moment in time to share our stories with one another. Can I have any other now comments from the guests about the speech or the meeting tonight? If anybody is able to come off of the mute and would like to make comments, observations. We have several guests. Anyone?
Uh,
Karen, go
Hi,
ahead.
I am Kiran. I feel this was great storytelling, and I thought that it should not end. That was my, yeah, I wanted to continue that story listening. Okay, so this was good, and I love that, and maybe I want to attend a meeting every week. So please share the details.
That's
Thank
fine.
you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Could you leave your email address in the chat
Yes,
as
ma'am.
well as
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
we'll send you off information. We do
Yeah.
meet every week, and we
Okay.
would love for you to come join us,
Yeah.
become a member of the club, and start to use your own storytelling techniques. Unfortunately, we have quite a number of our members who are not here tonight, and they missed out
Okay.
on a wonderful celebration story from Jim. I would like to find out from any of the other guests if you have comments or your experience. Dan, I know it's really early for you over in Nairobi, but did you enjoy the session? Okay. Well, I am going to stop the recording because we have come to a close here, but
Mhm.
I'd like to say very much thank you